Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. This part of the bill is significantly better than Part 1 that we were just addressing. Part 1, exactly, everything is very relative, Mr Goff. Part 1 grossly expanded the powers of the GCSB without adequate oversight mechanisms and in a way that many New Zealanders are very uncomfortable with. What Part 2 does is make some changes and improvements to the oversight of the GCSB, and for that we are grateful. But, Mr Chair, what I want to do in this call and subsequent calls is work through the way in which these changes may be useful, but in the view of the Labour Party, they do not go far enough to providing New Zealanders with the assurance that the Inspector General's role is a valuable and worthy one that they can have confidence in will give a GCSB that New Zealanders have trust and faith in and know is being looked after. And in principle, Mr Chair, that's because it remains a reactive role. It remains largely a reactive role, and a reactive role that still keeps in place the role of the Prime Minister or the Minister responsible for GCSB, who has always been the Prime Minister, still puts them right at the centre with control over virtually every aspect of the operation of the GCSB, from governance to effectively down to management. So what I do want to do at the outset, though, is say that we support the notion of the creation of the Deputy Inspector General role. We think that this will be very useful. It was clearly highlighted in the Kim.com case, the fact that Justice Naser was stretched when it came to trying to deal with the issues. When it then came to the illegal spying on 88 New Zealanders, the capabilities of the Inspector General were well and truly stretched. And so we do support Part 2 insofar as it creates that Deputy Inspector General role, and also in terms of the opening up of the way in which complaints can be made and dealt with by the Inspector General, which is contained, as the Minister's just told us, in Clause 31, which amends Section 11 of the Act. So those are useful changes, but there is severe limitation around how valuable those changes will be, and that's what I want to work through now. And if we look at the new Section 29, the new Clause 5, we say straight away where some of the problems start. 5.2, the Inspector General and Deputy Inspector General must be appointed on the recommendation of the Prime Minister following consultation with the Intelligence and Security Committee. Once again, we just want to recap where we have the Prime Minister and the different roles that the Prime Minister has in relation to the GCSB. We have the Prime Minister appointing the Director of the GCSB, and we've already seen with the appointment of Ian Fletcher how the Prime Minister's role in that process can be abused when the Prime Minister cuts across a process that's already in place, calls his friend up, tells his friend to speak to the Chief Executive of the Prime Minister's Department, who's on the appointment panel. Only one person gets interviewed for that role, and that is the Prime Minister's friend, and then that person gets appointed. So, that's right, and the head of the Prime Minister's Department, as Annette King reminds me, met with that person while that process was underway. So that's our concern about that. The Prime Minister's appointing the head of the GCSB, the Prime Minister's chairing the Oversight Committee of the GCSB, and here now, in this clause here, we have the Prime Minister responsible for ensuring that for appointing the Inspector General and the Deputy Inspector General. What we're saying on this side of the House, Mr Chair, is that when we look at the way in which the Inspector General's function is set up, we need to move with the times. This legislation was created in 1996. If we fast forward to 2013, people's concerns about the role of security and intelligence agencies, the kind of information that's being collected, means that this watchdog role that we're talking about in Part 2 is more important than ever. And we actually do have to recognise that things are different than they were in 1996. The public have a higher expectation of the kind of oversight and watchdog role that will be in place. And what I want to venture to suggest, Mr Chair, is what should be here in this part is the role of Parliament in this. The role of Parliament. Now, we do have some change to that a Member of Parliament can, under the new section, or the amended Section 11, can initiate an inquiry. But the whole process of appointment of the Inspector General is one that I would actually venture to suggest should end up being an Officer of Parliament type role in the long term. Now, that would be the kind of issue that would be raised in the review that the Labour Party has been proposing. But my personal view is we should be moving that role more towards an Officer of Parliament position. And I think that's an important step we could take to restore confidence in this role of Inspector General. That's not what's here. So we have some improvement, Mr Chair.
Grant Robertson.
We have some improvement here in Clause 5 to create a Deputy Inspector General role, but we on this side of the House believe that this role of Inspector General should be considered for being a role of an Officer of Parliament. We know from the role that the other Officers of Parliament play, the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, the Auditor General, Ombudsman, that those roles are one step removed from the day-to-day process of government, and that is what will restore confidence in the GCSB and in the Inspector General's role if New Zealanders know that that person effectively is working on behalf of parliamentarians who work on behalf of them. So that is the direction the Labour Party would like to see considered here. Unfortunately, this section does not go that far. And while we would like to be able to support all of these changes that are in this bill, in the end, when a bill does not give the oversight and the watchdog role the power that we believe it has, then we will not be able to support that aspect of the bill. Mr Chair, I wanted to go on to talk a little about the Section 33, the new Section 15 around the advisory panel. Again, a useful step forward that there will now be a wider group of people looking into the way that the GCSB does its work and supporting the Inspector General in their role. But it is again a very low-key role. It's about providing advice, Section 15B1. The function of the advisory panel is to provide advice to the Inspector General. Now they can do that on their own initiative and that's good, but again it does not serve to increase New Zealanders' confidence in the way in which the advisory panel would work. We on this side of the House, if we're going to have an advisory panel like this, would like to see it have a stronger role. I actually think if we got the Inspector General's office role correct, if we created it as an Officer of Parliament, I don't actually think the advisory panel role would need to be significantly changed from the way it is here in the Act. But in the absence of that change, Mr Chair, then I think the advisory panel's role needs to be stronger. And I want to pay respect to Justice Naser, but it was quite clear in the process around Kim.com, when Justice Naser did his report into what happened in the Kim.com case, there were major inaccuracies in the report that he provided. And I don't believe he was in a position to play the watchdog role that New Zealanders would expect, because that fundamentally comes back to the way in which the GCSB goes about its work. And while we all understand that an intelligence agency has to act in secret for a large part of what it does, the confidence-building measures that sit around that have to therefore be even more robust. If we're going to allow the agency to have the powers that it has, even under the current legislation, let alone the extended powers, then we need the robust oversight and watchdog roles to be there. We simply don't believe that the advisory panel, as it's constituted here, will do that. I'm sure the people appointed to it will be excellent people. One of them has to be a lawyer. Mr Finlayson, in future times, looking for a new career, may choose to take on that role, and they're very soon, perhaps after November next year, may choose to take on that role. So there will be people on this, I'm sure, who will be learned. But who would be learned people. But if they aren't given the teeth to actually have a proper oversight of the Inspector General, then on this side of the House, Mr Chair, we simply don't believe that is a sufficient role. The advisory panel is again provided with, under new Section 15E of the Act, is provided with clerical and secretarial services by the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Now, it would be fair to say that when the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet is providing secretarial services, if the Henry inquiry is anything to go by, this clause should not pass. Because the role that the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet played in the Henry inquiry was to directly ask for the records of journalists, to invoke the Prime Minister's office in doing that. We have to be careful if we're passing this clause into law, Mr Chair, that we are giving the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet a role with an advisory panel that's meant to be separate from executive government. And I think it is actually quite important, if we're going to set an advisory panel like this up, that it has its own staffing, it has its own ability to play its role. Otherwise, the perception in the mind of the public will be reinforced that the Prime Minister, who has a large degree of control over these agencies, will also be able to control the advisory panel. So, Mr Chair, my view here is that while there are some useful changes that have been brought in Part 2, they simply don't go far enough, and they will not restore the confidence of New Zealanders in the GCSB or the Inspector General.
Call Dr Russell Norman.
Mr Chair, I rise on behalf of the Green Party to speak about Part